So the first part is just introduction to the user interface. There's a lot on this slide. This is mostly just to remind myself what to talk about. This will be more interesting if I actually start FLAC3D and then walk you through it. So I'm going to escape out of PowerPoint here. I should also note that you have all of this material. You have the PowerPoints in the form of PDFs, and all the examples we will talk about, you have them as well. You can download from the learning management system where you found this video. I highly encourage you to follow along. It's nice because you can pause the video, and especially if you have two screens, you can follow along and do the problems as I'm doing them. You certainly don't have to. Again, you have all these projects completed, and you can just go and look at the finished projects if you want to. Okay, let's minimize PowerPoint. Let's start FLAC3D. So for this, I'm using FLAC3D 9.1. If you're using 9.0, it will be very, very similar. If you're using version 7 or older, it might look a bit different. And the general concepts are the same. The layout is a little bit different in version 7 and older. If you're using 9.2 or 9.3 or something later, obviously I don't know what those look like yet, but it will probably be quite similar to what we see here. This general layout and functionality is pretty stable. We will be making small tweaks as always, but what I'm showing here will probably be fairly representative of future versions of FLAC3D. Okay, so you start up FLAC3D and you see this dialog, the startup dialog. There's some little notifications here. It tells you about if you want to go and look at what was done in the latest update. If you don't have the latest version, it will tell you here. It will say, hey, you don't have the latest version. Click here to get it or to see what changes were made in the latest version and so on. New to FLAC3D, there's a link here. If I click it, it will go to a section of the manual for new users. And then there's a technical support link. And you may or may not, if you've started this up, you might see another line here that says you don't have a valid license. That's perfectly fine. You can actually run FLAC3D in demo mode. If you don't have a license at all, you can run some problems with up to 1,000 zones. If you have a license and it's not showing up here, you can just click on the link and then fill in the details that are required to get your license working. Okay, I have a license, so I don't see that at all. I just now have to decide if I want to make a new project or open an existing project. And also helpfully here, it's listed recently used projects. And, this is helpful, obviously, if I just want to go back to one that I've worked on recently. In this case, we'll just make a new project. I'll say OK. It defaults to a directory. If you're in Windows, it defaults to your documents, FLAC3D, in my case, 9.10. And then there's a My Projects directory. You can see I've already got some in here. I recommend if you're making a new project to put it in a new directory. The project itself is a file, and the file is basically full of pointers to other things like data files and plots and maybe DXFs and other geometries and things like that. So there will probably be multiple files associated with the project. And so as you can see here, I usually put a new project in its own directory. So I would make a new directory here. I've already got one called test. Let's call this test2. And I'll make the project file itself. Let's call it test2. By default, if I don't give an extension, the extension is .prj for project. Save that. All right, so here I'm looking at FLAC3D. I've got a new project. There's nothing in it. What you can see is it pops up with the documentation over here on the side. In your case, it might look like this if this window is a little bit smaller. You see this whole list of the documentation here, which is maybe a little bit daunting. What you probably want to do is expand it so you can see the tree and then click on the FLAC. So the software guide is everything. probably what you want to do is look at the FLAC3D specific documentation. Note that a lot of the documentation for FLAC2D and FLAC3D is the same. So you will see that in many cases it just says FLAC because FLAC2D and FLAC3D are so similar. We can use the same documentation. So if I click on that, let's expand this window here, expand this pane, I should say. So I can see the sort of front page for the FLAC documentation. It's kind of cool to have it appear here over on the right-hand side. Often this is not enough space for you. Almost always you probably want to open this in a separate window. You can do that by, this is all HTML based, it's just a web-based help system. So I can right click on here and say open in default browser, or I can click in on this little icon here and it will open in a browser. In my case, I'm in Microsoft Edge. So it opens in a browser, it opens to the page that I was just looking at, the front page for FLAC2D and FLAC3D. And if you're a brand new user and you've never used FLAC3D before, obviously you could drill down here and read all of this documentation. Probably that's not how you want to get started. I would recommend going to this tutorial, FLAC3D Dive In. So if I click on this link, it takes me to a tutorial, and it's a very detailed step-by-step description of how to build a model and how to solve it and how to interpret it. More or less what we're going to do in this training course. It's a different example. So if you want to, you could have a look at this tutorial before following along with this training course, or you could skip it and just follow along with this training course. But this is a document describing, everything about how to create a relatively simple model. Starting with making a new project, which is what we just did, and so on. So I certainly recommend, if you're a new user, to go and walk through that and have a look at it. Okay, so that's the help. It appears over here by just clicking on this little question mark. You can also go to help and documentation. And you'll do the same thing. Another thing to show you in the help menu here is often people will start by opening an existing example and working with that. So we may provide you with an example that's quite close to something you want to do in your project. You can start with an existing example and just modify it, or even just look at it to see how it's done. So if you go to help examples, you get a list of all of the examples that we give you in FLAC3D. You can scroll down here, there's probably over 100. They're listed alphabetically, which may or may not be helpful. What is more useful is to go here and just search. So let's pretend I want to do an example. Let's pretend I want to do a problem with a tunnel. I can just search for tunnel. And now I can just see the examples related to tunnels. I can find one that looks close to what I want. I can click on it and I can go here and open it. And what it will actually do, or I can select a folder where I want to make a copy of that example. It will make a copy of that example in the folder that you specify, and then it will open a new FLAC3D with that example open, and you can just walk through it and do stuff. All right, we won't do that now, but that's certainly possible. What we'll do is assume that we're creating a brand new project, just so I can show you how it works. So you're looking at this screen, you don't really know what to do. It says, use the pull-down menus above to manage this space. This space here is the main workspace, okay? So in here you have your plots and your data files and other things. Most of the things that you're working with will appear here in this workspace. Over on the left-hand side, we have the stuff that goes into the project itself, right? So the project contains data files, plots, save states, and potentially other things. And they will appear over here on the left side. On the right-hand side here, we have help. We also have other things, fish symbols and controls for plots that I'll show in a minute, and things like that. All of these different sections can be resized. So you can just grab the bar here and move things around. They can also be hidden. So I'll show in a minute why you might want to hide and have more real estate, but it's super easy to hide and bring back these different sections. So if I don't care about my list of files, I can just click the project and that disappears. I can bring it back again. If I don't care about this command window down here, I can just hide that, bring it back again. You could even hide the workspace. It's hard to think of a reason why you would want to do that, but you could. And these controls over here, you can hide them by just clicking this right arrow, and they essentially collapse over to the right, and it's easy to bring them back again. Okay, so I've still got an empty project. I still need to do something here. Use the pull-down menus above to manage this space. So here we go. I don't have anything yet to open, and I don't have a model to look at, so I'm going to go to New. And here I can create a new data file, a new plot, geometry set, sketch set, building block set. I'll talk about this a little bit later. For the purposes of this demonstration, let's just make a new data file. So a data file is just a text file. I can call it whatever I want. Geometry. By default, the extension will be .dat for data file. It's really just a text file. Opens up a text editor. Okay, so this text editor is uses the same libraries as Notepad++. So if you've ever used that, this follows the same kind of patterns. It's your standard text editor, so I can just type something. Let's type a FLAC3D command here. So zone create brick. Okay. You can see the keywords here are in bold. Other words are in black. I'll talk more about commands and data files later on when we're doing the example. But just to show you that this is like a regular editor. If I add lines, you can see there's line numbering. There's the usual controls here: undo, redo, search for things, add comments. And if you hit this little button here with the sliders on it, you can change all the appearance and so on of the editor. So I can change the font size or the font or the background and things like that. We can make this font a little bit bigger for this example. You can also hold down Control and use the mouse wheel to make things bigger and smaller, like you can on web pages. Okay, so I've got a data file. You probably know that a lot of the things that are done with Itasca software involve writing commands. That's certainly not everything. I'll show later during the example how you can build models graphically using the mouse and manipulate them and so on. But eventually you will get to a point where you're going to want to type commands. So here's pretty much the simplest command I could come up with. Zone create brick. And what this does is it creates a 10 by 10 by 10 brick of zones, of FLAC3D zones. So I have commands in my data file. I can run it by just pressing on this little green arrow here. So I run it. You can see down here is the command console. And what this does is it echoes the commands that were actually executed. So you can see here, when I press that green arrow, it's actually executing a command, which is program call geometry.dat. And then inside of that data file is the command zone create brick. Sometimes when these commands are executed, you will get extra information like, hey, I just created 1,000 zones, or this command failed for some reason, so you'll often get extra information down here, which is probably why you don't necessarily want to hide this section when you're running these commands. Okay, so let's assume that worked. I didn't get any sort of error message. It's zone create brick. Now I want to look at it. So the next thing you would probably do is create a plot. So I go up here and I say new plot. I can give it a name. Let's call it zones. Now I've got a plot. You can see as I'm adding things that they're appearing over here on the left side where the project information is. So I've got a data file called geometry.dat. I've got a plot called zones. Obviously, I could have many, many data files and many, many plots. Um, right now, I've got a plot showing on the screen here with nothing in it. So I need to tell it what to plot. So if I go to this plus, so notice the controls over here are now related to plotting rather than the data file. If I go to this plus, these are all the crazy things I can plot in FLAC3D. Zones, tensors, boundaries, structural elements, so on and so on. I can choose one of these things to plot. The things that are most commonly plotted, you can get to with this little drop-down arrow here. Zones, history charts, and axes. So in this case, we want to look at the zones. So I just choose zone. Here we go. Here's my 10 by 10 by 10 brick of FLAC3D zones. The basic plotting controls are as follows. If I hold down the right mouse button and spin, right, this rotates it. If I use the mouse wheel, I can zoom in and out. Note that it zooms in and out from the point where your mouse is. What I just did there is I held down the right mouse button and the left mouse button, and then I can move it side to side or up and down. So right mouse button rotates, mouse wheel zooms, and right plus left does a pan. There are other controls. You can do different types of rotations and things like that. The whole story of all the controls you can do here, you can find by right-clicking somewhere in the white space and going to plot control help. So if I click on that, now the help appears over on the right-hand side here, and it tells me all the things I can do to manipulate this plot. And there's even keyboard shortcuts for almost everything here. So if you're the kind of person that likes to use keyboard shortcuts, they're all here. If you like to use the mouse, they're also here. So there's the help for that. I want to get back to the controls for the plot. You can see I've plotted zones. It's coloring them by group. There's all kinds of controls here to manipulate this plot. We'll talk about that later. Right now, I'm just focusing on, projects and layouts. But anyway, here's my plot. Notice that the controls up here now are related to plots rather than the data file. So, the searching and replacing and undos are not here anymore. Instead, we have different controls. This one is particularly useful. This little circle inside of a rectangle. What this does is it resets the plot back to the XZ plane. So let's pretend I was looking at something and I rotated all around and zoomed out somewhere and I got myself all messed up. You can see how messed up I am by adding the axes on here. Let's go and add some axes. Right, so who knows where I'm at right now. If I want to get back to the sort of default plot, I just click this thing here or use the keyboard Control-R. It goes back to the XZ plane centered in the middle. And this is extraordinarily useful. Okay, so here I've got a plot and I've got a data file. So if I go over here and double click on the data file, it brings it back into the workspace. If I double click on the plot, it brings that back in the workspace. Very often what you want to do is look at a data file and a plot at the same time. So this is super easy. What you can do is just split the workspace. In version 7 and older, we used to have these dockable panes. So you could actually grab this plot and move it somewhere else, or grab the data file and move it somewhere else. And we had these floating windows. That turned out to be a problem for all kinds of reasons that I won't go into. Having this ability to do splitting and resizing turns out to be easier and more intuitive and also easier to maintain for us. So this is the system from version 9 onwards. So I've got my workspace, but I can certainly split it into different pieces. So I just go up here to this little icon with the line in the middle and say split. I could say split left. For me personally, I like to show the data file on the left and the plot on the right. So I said split left. It opened a new window with nothing in it. If I click in this window, you can see that it's now bold and blue. I can either choose what I want to plot in that window from this dropdown, right? I could open this data file, or I can just double click on the data file here, and it appears here. Notice that if I now click on this right-hand one, notice that this becomes bold and blue. So if I double click on something here, it's going to open on the right-hand side. So you have to be a little bit careful. You know, maybe I'm looking at this plot and I say, oh, I want to see the data file. I double click on the data file and it appears over here. So you either have to be careful about where you clicked when you're double clicking on things in the project side, or just use these drop downs and then there's no ambiguity. So open the data file here. I can open the plot here. Oh, I have something that is, you know, quite comfortable to use. Again, I can resize these things. So if I want to make the plot bigger, I can do that. If I want to make the data file bigger, I can do that. I can make the controls smaller. I could hide the controls. Often when I'm in this kind of mode and I'm looking at a data file and a plot, I maybe want a little bit more real estate, so I can hide the project here on the left-hand side to give myself a little bit more space. Maybe I can hide the commands down here temporarily to give myself some more space. So I've got more space to look at things. Once I have more space, I want to maybe have actually more plots on here. So you can keep on splitting. So let's pretend over here I've got this plot. Maybe I want to have two plots on the right-hand side. So I can split this and say split below. So now I've got another empty screen here. Let's make a new plot. Let's call it zones 2. Right? I could add something else on this plot here. You know, color it by something else. Maybe I want to do a contour of displacements. They're all 0, but you get the idea. So now I can look at two plots at the same time. And again, I can change the sizing and so on. And I can just keep on splitting these things. I could have 2 data files at the same time, or I could have 8 plots or whatever I want. When you're sitting in these plots, obviously you can export them. So you can export them as a bitmap, which is obviously useful. Copy to the clipboard, export as DXF, different types of formats. I can even export a plot file. And so what that will do is it will essentially save that particular plot. And then I could use that file and bring it maybe into a different project or something like that. So that's sometimes useful. One of the useful export thing here is that, you know, obviously you can export individual plots. I can just right click on it and say export, or I can use this export icon up here. But one thing, again, if I have a bunch of splits and a bunch of plots here, I can export the whole workspace. So if I had, say, 4 plots on here, I could export all 4 plots into one bitmap, and that's sometimes useful. Okay, so that's basically the layout. Let's see what else I wanted to talk about here. Right, let's just go back to look at the project. So we don't have any save states. So let's pretend that you have worked on your project for a while and you've got a few plots here and you're happy with it. You probably want to save the project. So you go File, Save Project. When you save the project, it saves the whole layout. So whatever splitting you have and whatever rotations you have and whatever things are in the project, they're all saved. So next time I open this up, I will see exactly the same screen. So it's happy to save the project, but it's saying, do I want to save the model state? Because what I did here was I created a model with 1,000 zones in it. This model itself is not saved. In this case, it doesn't matter because I can regenerate it in 2 seconds. But in a real project, you've maybe created some zones and you've assigned the properties and the boundary conditions and you've solved it and you want to save that so you can bring it back later. So this hopefully warns you that maybe you want to save your model state as well as the model project. So I say yes, and let's call it zones. And again, the default extension when you save the state is .sav for save file. This is not a text file. This is a binary file, so you can't necessarily look at it unless you have FLAC3D. But it stores all the information about the zones and the displacements and velocities and structural elements and all that kind of stuff. So I save the state, and now I can see that the save state appears here on the left-hand side under the projects. Let's bring my commands back. So again, you could have multiple data files, multiple plots, multiple save states. You can bring back the data files and the plots by double-clicking on them, and they appear in the workspace. You can also bring back the save state by double-clicking on it. So let's pretend I want to clear everything, so I can give a command here in the console and just type model new. And what that does is it deletes all the zones and deletes all the structural elements and deletes anything else I have in the model and starts fresh. So you can see my zones disappeared. Now let's pretend I already ran a model and I wanted to bring it back again and look at it. I can just double click on the save state here, bring it back, and now I've got my zones back again. That's basically it for the introduction. This is what the FLAC3D user interface looks like. This is how you can manipulate it. Hopefully this is a good introduction for using FLAC3D. In the following videos, we will walk through an actual example in a lot more detail and show you how to manipulate the model and manipulate the plots and so on. All right, thank you for joining.